Good afternoon. I'm Senator Gary Daniels from District 11. Today, we will be holding a meeting of the Senate Finance Committee. Before we get started, I'll read through a checklist to ensure that the meeting we are holding is in compliance with the right to know law. As Chair of the Senate Finance Committee, I find that due to the state of emergency declared by the governor as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and in accordance with the governor's emergency order number 12, pursuant to Executive Order 2020-04 and its extensions, this public body is authorized to meet electronically. Please note there is no physical location to observe and listen contemporaneously to this meeting, which was authorized pursuant to the governor's emergency order. In accordance with the emergency order, I am confirming that we are providing public access to the meeting via telephone with additional access possible by video and other electronic means. We are utilizing Zoom for this electronic meeting. All members of the committee and selected legislative staff have the ability to communicate contemporaneously in this meeting through this platform. And the public has access to contemporaneously watch and/or listen to the meeting on Zoom or YouTube and via phone by following the directions and links provided on the General Court website. We have provided public notice of the necessary information for accessing the meeting in the Senate calendar. We are providing a mechanism for the public to alert the public body during the meeting if there are problems with access. If anyone has a problem, please email remotesenate, that's one word, at leg.state.nh.us or call 603-271-6931. In the event the public is unable to access the meeting, it will be adjourned and rescheduled. Please note that all votes taken during this meeting shall be done by roll call vote. Finally, let's start the meeting by taking roll call attendance. When each member states his or her presence, please also state where you are and if there is anyone else in the room with you during this meeting, which is required under the right to know law. I will call roll. Senator Rosenwald.
Hi, Cindy Rosenwald from District 13. I am present in the Senate chamber.
Senator D'Alessandro.
I'm Senator D'Alessandro, District 20. I'm present and in the chamber.
Senator Hennessy.
Erin Hennessy from Littleton. I'm present in the Senate chamber.
Senator Morse.
Senator Chuck Morse, I'm in the Senate chambers, present.
Senator Gaida.
Senator Gaida, I'm at my home in Warren, alone in the room with family upstairs at May Transit.
And I'm Senator Gary Daniels. I'm in the Senate chambers with the others. And we'll state also that Senator Reagan is excused from the meeting today. Our first appointment today is with the Office of Strategic Initiatives. And I would ask that whoever will be presenting, if they would introduce themselves for the record.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Jared Chicoine, and I'm the Director of the Office of Strategic Initiatives. Joining me today is Jane Lemire, and she is the Business Director at OSI.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
And please continue with your presentation.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We provided a handout to the committee, which we will use for this presentation. I would like to start by giving a brief overview of OSI, our programs and initiatives, which can be found on the third page of the handout. There are two divisions at OSI, the Energy Division and the Planning Division. We currently have 21 positions. 10 of those positions are non-classified and 11 are classified. There are 4 programs within our Energy Division: the Fuel Assistance Program, the Weatherization Program, and the State Energy Program. We also have the State Heating Oil and Propane Program. The Fuel Assistance Program is a federal program which helps approximately 35,000 low-income households in New Hampshire pay for winter fuel. The average annual household benefit for this program is approximately $900. OSI manages contracts with the state's 5 community action agencies, which work directly with those households in need. The Weatherization Assistance Program is a federal program which helps low-income households make permanent efficiency improvements in their homes. OSI contracts with the 5 community action agencies to conduct energy audits and weatherize homes. The program serves about between 200 and 250 households per year, with an average investment of about $5,200 per home. The state energy program at OSI is supported by the U.S. Department of Energy's Formula SEP grant. This grant supports OSI's energy analysis, policy work, and related activities. The U.S. Department of Energy requires a 20% match, which New Hampshire meets with funds from the federally established Petroleum Violation Escrow Fund. The state heating oil and propane program provides accurate and up-to-date information about energy costs in New Hampshire. This information is gathered on a weekly basis during the winter months from participating vendors and posted to the OSI website. There are 3 programs within our planning division: the Conservation Land Stewardship Program, the Municipal and Regional Assistance Program, and the National Flood Insurance Program. The Conservation Land Stewardship Program monitors right around 200 conservation easements throughout the state to ensure that they're managed properly, and oversees an additional 250 municipally held conservation land interests. The program is funded by interest income from the Land Conservation Endowment and through transfers from the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources and the Fish and Game Department. And that's for monitoring performed for those agencies. OSI's municipal and regional assistance staff provide technical assistance to local officials on planning and zoning issues, as well as publishing technical information and handbooks for municipal land use boards. OSI serves as the state's coordinating office for the National Flood Insurance Program. We provide technical assistance and training to municipalities and various stakeholders regarding floodplain regulations, floodplain mapping, and flood insurance. The program is 75% federal funds with a 25% general funds match. In addition to these programs, OSI is the designated state agency that manages the state data center, which involves a formal partnership with the U.S. Census. With the chairman, so that's an overview of our agency. With the chairman's permission, I'd like to continue on to the next pages in the handout, or answer any questions.
Are there any questions before we go on? Seeing none, please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Moving on from the overview, you'll notice in the handout we provided an activity summary of the overall agency budget, the OSI agency fiscal year comparisons, the FY 2020 actuals compared to the FY 2021 adjusted authorized, and the OSI FY 22-23 budget highlights compared to 21. I would note that it's difficult to compare our agency budget with the one passed by the House because, as I'm sure you're all aware, our agency is broken up with our energy functions moving to a new Department of Energy and our planning division moving to the Department of Business and Economic Affairs. But with that, if the chairman is okay with this, I'd like to start with the OSI FY 2020 actuals compared to FY 21 adjusted authorized.
Would be fine.
Okay, thank you. And of course, this was requested by the chairman in your letter to our office. And just to give you the highlights here, in the biennium 2021, we had 2 vacancies in our business office, 1 vacancy in our Conservation Land Stewardship Program, and 1 vacancy in the Energy Division, and that was a Fuel Assistance Program associate. Below that, you'll see the FY 2021 general fund budget comparisons. The overall percentage of general funds to our budget, our total budget for FY 20 was $31,329,354. So general funds amounted to 3.32% of our budget. And then if you look to FY 21, general funds authorized, it is 3.29% of our budget. I would note that salary and benefit increases were equal to about 25,000 in general funds. Many budget lines were reduced in FY 2020 as a result of the pandemic. In FY 20, we also had 2 vacancies. One staff member was reassigned to the Gopher team. Also in FY 21, personnel expenses in class line 10, 16, 17, and 60, they increase in FY 2021, and that's due to 2 staff members receiving step increases, 1 staff reclassification, and appropriations plan for possible staff retirements. The FY 21 budgeted expenses that are expected to be significantly reduced due to the pandemic are travel expenses, primarily federally funded, organizational dues as a result of not attending conferences this year, current expenses, less printing cost, office supplies, et cetera, and employee training was limited this year due to the pandemic. So that's the highlights and the FY 21 actuals compared to FY 2021 adjusted authorized. Any questions on that?
Any questions for Jared so far? See, Senator Gaida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Jared, for coming before Finance in the Senate. I am in receipt of a letter in response to a letter signed by myself and a number of other representatives and senators concerning the operations of the SEC. Is it envisioned that that department will come into your division as part of what's going on, or is energy, how are you going to interface with energy, I guess is the question.
Sure. Thank you, Senator, for the question. I'll do my best. Some of this may need to be filled in by the governor's budget director, but I'll do my best to understand it as I think I have a grasp of that piece of it. In the governor's proposed budget, where he proposed the Department of Energy, and then in the House passed budget, OSI's role, essentially the energy staff here will move to the new department, and the SEC, if I understand it correctly, is administratively attached to the new department. So, you know, our involvement here at OSI, the energy efforts that we're involved in are not regulatory in nature. So the programs that are moving to this new department, fuel assistance, state energy program, weatherization, would be under policy and programs in the new department. Sorry, I don't mean to ramble, but I don't know exactly, I don't envision.
All right, but so if I may, your OSI will not be overseeing SEC.
Correct, because we essentially go away and the staff simply becomes part of it. So, you know, there'll be a new commissioner, new deputy commissioner, new management team at that agency.
Okay, thanks very much.
Sure.
Further questions? Seeing none. Thank you. Senator Gaida, did you have a further question? Okay.
Okay.
Okay, please continue.
Thank you. We've also included on the next page the OSI budget FY 22-23 highlights, and we included this. I'll just note that you know our budget, the portions of our budget that moved to this new Department of Energy, those numbers are, for lack of a better phrase, are baked in to that new department. So I really couldn't speak to the adjusted authorized in the compare House to Governor, but what I did include here is just a comparison of the FY 22-23 agency budget to FY 21. I know the committee didn't ask for that, but I thought I would include that. As part of that agency budget, our goal was to meet the budget reductions that were requested by the governor's office. And we accomplished those in a couple of different ways. We elected to leave the administrative secretary position, which is vacant. We proposed that as vacant and unfunded in the FY 22-23 biennium. That position was funded with general funds as well as some federal funds. So, and then also due to program staff vacancies, remaining program staff and agency staff were directed more time to federal programs that needed assistance. So we did that. We also reduced current expenses and equipment while increasing other funds and federal fund revenues. So I thought that might be helpful to the committee to see that comparison in those highlights. Any questions on that page?
Seeing none, please continue.
Okay, thank you. The final page includes, it's really just two pie charts that are a helpful visual for the committee on our sources of funding here at OSI, general funds, federal funds, and other funds. Happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions from the committee? Senator Gaida?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jared, in your reduction of use of general funds, obviously the budget increases significantly in total year over year, up to I think 36 million. So are you anticipating or are you assured of the additional federal funding that will have to be, I guess, the source of the difference?
We're anticipating that based on historical funding through these federal programs. So it's very, the programs that we administer here are very consistent: weatherization, fuel assistance. So it's based on the historic grant awards that we've received.
Okay.
So we're fairly confident in those numbers.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Senator D'Alessandro?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In relationship to many of those federal funds, how closely are you working with the CAP agencies with regard to the fuel assistance program and the weatherization program?
Thank you, Senator. Very closely. So we have a very good relationship with the community action agencies. As you might know, and it's easy to understand, during the pandemic, it was a difficult time for everyone. And the community action agencies did, I think, an exceptional job managing through the pandemic with staff shortages. You know, we had very few backlog issues, for instance, with fuel assistance. And they really did a great job, and we have a very good partnership with them.
Thank you.
Further questions? Senator Gaida?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jared, the other funds, where do those come from in the funding sources?
Sure. One, for instance, would be the Petroleum Violation Escrow Fund, which I believe, and I've got Jane Lemire here from my office who may be able to, who could clarify if I get this wrong, but that's settlement funds from a settlement that happened in the 1980s. So we're still using those funds here at OSI. I think that we've done a good job managing that through the years. It's stretched over, you know, nearly 35 years now, I think. So that'd be an example of other funds. Transfers from other agencies, for instance, CLS monitors conservation easements for fish and game, and the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources. So that would fall under other funds as well, contracts with those agencies. Another small one would be Granite, which is a GIS software program that we administer, and other agencies contribute to that.
Thank you very much.
So just to follow up on your comment, if Fish and Game were to manage a conservation easement, does that get passed on to you, or do they actually manage it?
So what our role is to monitor that easement. So it would be best practices. You wouldn't want the agency monitoring their own property for violations. So our role is to make sure that there are no violations of the terms of that easement on that property. So it would be difficult for them to do that on their own. So this eliminates any conflict of interest for those agencies when we monitor them for violations and compliance.
So when my town has a conservation easement that Fish and Game is holding, and we pay $30,000 to Fish and Game for monitoring, does that 30,000 get passed on to you, or does it stay with Fish and Game?
I don't have an answer on the breakdown. That's a very good question. I would have to get, Senator, I would have to follow up with you with details. I don't have the contracts close, but I could absolutely provide those numbers for you.
Yeah, if you could, please, that would be great.
Absolutely. We can do that.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Now go on to the Council on Developmental Disabilities. This will be on page 200 of your compare report. Good afternoon. Oh,
I think she's muted, huh?
Good
There we go.
afternoon.
there we
Thank
go.
you. Good afternoon, Senators.
Good.
For the record, my name is Isadora Rodriguez Legendre. I'm the Executive Director of the New Hampshire Council on Developmental Disabilities. Also in the wings with me today are Ronnie-Ann Rakowski, who is our Director of Policy and Planning, as well as Mary Lawson, who is our Senior Accounting Technician. I'd like to thank the members of the Senate Finance Committee for the opportunity to present our budget. And I'd like to start off with saying a little bit about the Council on Developmental Disabilities, for those who aren't familiar with our work. So we are dedicated to dignity, full rights of citizenship, cultural diversity, equal opportunities, and full participation for all New Hampshire citizens with developmental disabilities. We do a lot of work through education, advocacy, and also through the funding innovative projects that help improve the lived experience of people with developmental disabilities in New Hampshire. Most of the work that we do by collaborating with other groups and entities, other organizations that have a similar vision of a robust community-based life for people with developmental disabilities. We are created by federal legislation known as the DD Act. And so there's a DD Council in every state and territory of the United States. We are 100% federally funded, and our funding comes from a formula based on the congressionally approved budget on an annual basis. So depending on what that is how we find out what our federal allotment will be. We are what's known as a minimum allotment state, which means we get the minimum amount of a state because that formula is based on a per capita incidence of developmental disabilities in the state. We get around $560,000 a year to do our work. So we do a lot with a little bit of money. Our grant allotment allows for a 2-year project period. So the federal government allows us to carry funds forward. However, we try to spend the money we have so that New Hampshire citizens with developmental disabilities can benefit from those funds on an annual basis. So also to know is by law, at least 60% of our membership must be individuals with developmental disabilities and or parents or guardians of individuals with developmental disabilities. And they're all volunteers. This really ensures that our work is driven by the people most impacted. The other seats on our council are comprised of agencies like the Bureau of Developmental Services under DHHS, the Disability Rights Center, the Institute on Disability out of UNH, the Department of Elderly and Adult Services, Private Provider Network, vocational rehabilitation. So entities that are really dedicated to providing services for people with developmental disabilities in New Hampshire, since we don't provide direct services. We work with other organizations to help bolster those services. Our members are appointed by the governor to 3-year terms, and how we do our work is we develop a state plan every 5 years that is really based on input from the community of people with developmental disabilities and family members, as well as direct support providers of those individuals that need supports to live and work in the community. Our goals, objectives, and activities really are driven to provide resources. So we typically put a good amount of money in Class 72, which is related to projects and grants. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when I get into the specifics of our budget. Does anyone have any questions so far?
Any questions from the committee? I would just have one question. The money that you receive federally, can that be used to apply for further grants?
So that is a great question. Our funds actually, for grants that we fund in community settings, we are required to identify what's called a non-federal match. So there is a requirement that we access 25% of other funds available for the projects that we are supporting. So that is one way that we access other funds. And then typically by partnering with other organizations who have their own funds, we're able to pool resources so that our contribution a lot of times is minimal compared to the pooled resources of other entities.
And so you get this 25% non-federal match from where?
So from other contributors, for example, if we are going to sponsor a conference for direct support professionals, we might do a $5,000 sponsorship. And then the committee putting on the conference will also reach out to the different area agencies, for example, private providers for people with disabilities, and altogether, the resources pooled might be $80,000 for that conference, where our contribution is $5,000.
Okay.
That counts as non-federal match. We are
Okay.
also able to count, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Okay.
We're also able to count, for example, someone's staff time as non-federal match from another department. So if somebody is not another department within the state, but if somebody from an agency or organization is coordinating an event or activity, their salary could also be counted as non-federal match in kind.
And just to verify, I think you said previously that none of this money comes from the state.
That's correct. We
Okay.
don't get any funds from the state.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? Senator D'Alessandro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I noticed that your federal grants drop off substantially in 22 and 23. What's the reason for that?
Yes, so that's a great question, Senator D'Alessandro. Thank you for that. So as all other state agencies, we were required to develop an efficiency budget as part of the governor's guidance. And because we have pretty static staffing costs and other related costs to operate our organization, the only place we really were able to find a substantial amount of money to cut was in that line 72, grants, scholarships, and sponsorships. And so I can talk a little bit more about that. So in order to meet the governor's efficiency budget, we did cut grants and scholarships around $34,000 from class 72. And the impact of this is really that it limits our ability to sponsor things like trainings, events, and activities designed to improve the lived experiences of people with developmental disabilities in New Hampshire. Also, out of that class, we provide funds for things called demonstration activities. So these are typically larger projects that are pilot projects, for example, new approaches to providing additional services to people with developmental disabilities in the community. So this reduction in resources actually directly limits the available funds that we have to support individuals and family members in community-based settings in New Hampshire. So on my wish list, since we are 100% federally funded, we would be able to spend 100% of our federal allotment.
Further question?
Follow up?
I see that, but indeed, if that's the case, your ability to service drops off fairly dramatically in 22 and goes down even further in 23. And there's no, the feds do not require a general fund match because you don't have any general fund money. So
Right.
is there a matching mechanism that you have to raise or something? Because this doesn't seem logical to me that you would give up federal money in an area where services are desperately required.
Yes, I agree with you. It again was an exercise that the governor required of all state agencies. However, those funds are available to us should we need them via the federal government. So we can always, within the budget year, submit for a waiver that would go through governor and council, which would allow us to then draw down on those additional funds.
There's one further one.
Follow
So there's a policy by which if you manifest the need, you can apply for more funds.
Correct.
Yeah, okay, and that's all. It's all of your money comes on a drawdown basis, doesn't it?
Correct.
Okay.
So we would just notify governor and council that we need additional funds. The funds are available through the federal accounting units provided. And typically there's no reason to deny a request.
Thank you.
Senator Rosenwald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you were going to try to bring in those extra federal dollars, would you also have to come to the fiscal committee?
That's a great question. I actually don't know the answer to that. I believe that unless it reaches a certain amount of funds in total, and I believe that amount is $100,000, that it doesn't need to go through the fiscal committee, but I could be mistaken about that. So I'm happy to check on that for you and get back to you.
Thank you.
Further questions? Seeing none? Please continue. Or is that it?
I think that our, aside from line 72, which is the grants, most of the other changes that we have from the adjusted authorized in 20 are pretty straightforward. We're fully staffed, and during the pandemic, actually, were submitted for and were approved, got a waiver to hire an additional part-time position, which is not a new position. It had just been unfunded. And so because we are fully staffed, we had a reduction in need for consultants. So that's why that is different. But for the most part, everything is pretty straightforward with our budget. So if anyone has additional questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Senator Morse?
Is there a cap to your federal drawdown?
So we receive on an annual basis a federal notice of award, which will tell us what the full available amount is to our agency. And that comes after Congress votes on their budget. So we operate on a federal fiscal year, so we won't know until October, after October 1st, what our federal allotment will be for the next year, for 22.
Thank you.
Is that the approximate 560,000 a year that you're talking about?
Correct. And then we typically carry some funds forward, which is why you see $620,000 budgeted for 2020 and 648 for 22 and a little bit more than that in 23.
Okay, and you stated that you could apply for more funds. Can you apply for more funds that exceed that cap of 560?
So those funds are what's available to our organization as a Council on Developmental Disabilities. Now, periodically, what will happen is the DD Act also creates what's called an Office of Projects of National Significance. So the Administration on Community Living out of the Federal Department of Health and Human Services will periodically release RFPs or requests for proposals based on additional funds that they have available, to which we can either partner with other organizations to apply or apply directly. So there have been instances where we have partnered with the Institute on Disabilities, for example, out of UNH, who go after a lot of grant funds through the federal government, and we will be a consultant on the grant and then receive part of that grant in return.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no further questions, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you. Have a great day.
And you as well. Next, we have the Executive Council. This will be on page 202 of your compare report.
Okay. Can everyone hear me?
We can.
Okay. Sorry, I haven't used Zoom a lot. I've used Teams, so I was nervous, like, oh my gosh, I hope they'll let me in. I can get it.
Yeah, it's letting you out that's a problem.
So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Megan Rose, and I am the Executive Assistant for the Office of the Executive Council. I mean, our budget is very simple compared to a lot of the other agencies because we're very small. Pretty much every one of our line items that you'll see is to the letter of what it is that we need to operate without any excess in the budget. There's myself, there's a part-time staff person, and then the 5 elected executive counselors that are in the office most of the time. Although because of COVID, we're often working remote, as you can tell that I am today. So I'm happy for any questions if anybody has anything specific they would like to ask.
Any questions? I guess not at this time. Oh, what? We do have one from Senator Hennessy.
Sure.
Thank you. My question is, this, I don't see in here the actual salary payments to the executive counselors. Is that in another section of the budget?
That's actually, I believe, class 11 is for the council. Take a look on my other thing here that I've got my budget on, so. Yes, so class 11 is personal services unclassified, that would be the council's salary.
On page 202?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Any further questions? Seeing none, I guess we're all set, Megan.
Okay,
Very much.
thank you.
And the committee will be in recess for 5 minutes. Okay, the committee will reconvene and take the Secretary of State's office. And one question, let's see, we have Dave Scanlon on. Dave, will you be also presenting the Boxing and Wrestling Commission?
Mr. Chairman, I have Paula Penny sitting right here next to me, so I'll just slide the screen over so you can see her and she'll present boxing and wrestling.
Okay, so why don't we take up that first, please?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. I'm Paula Penny, and I'm here on behalf of Commissioner Bobby Stevens, who sends his regards and his regrets for not being able to join you today. The Boxing and Wrestling Commission is a commission that oversees boxing and wrestling events, as it sounds, and also mixed martial arts, which has been added to it over the years. As you can see, they have a very modest budget. Their budget really consists of mileage for the commissioners for when they go to events and for weigh-ins and licensings for these events. And per diem, which is the class 50, where they get paid a stipend for that, as well as a small amount for them to belong to the National Association. This past year, some of their events obviously have been curtailed due to the COVID situation, but they're hoping that over the next year, things will get back to a little bit of normal for them.
Thank you. And since the year is, by the time we get through with this, it'll be half gone. Is there any adjustment to be made in the 2021 to account for a loss of half a year?
I believe when I spoke last to Commissioner Stevens, they did have some events in that year. There may be a little bit of surplus back, in that budget for fiscal year 2021. We should know that within, the next several weeks, once we paid out the per diems that we do owe them and the mileage. We do that quarterly. So at that point, we'll have a little better idea of what will be excess in this year's fiscal year budget.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you, Paula.
You're very welcome.
If you want to slide that over to
I certainly will.
Mr. Scanlon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm David Scanlon, Deputy Secretary of State. Present our department budget, we put together an efficiency budget as requested by the governor. Really no changes in terms of requests for additional funds for projects. It's just a level funded budget. House has agreed with that. And I really don't have a whole lot to add to that other than ask questions. I will say that we did come off a very challenging year in 2020 with conducting a presidential general election, a state primary under COVID conditions. And we did receive $3.2 million in federal funds that were specific to conducting the elections under the COVID situation. We used a couple $100,000 of that to hire an accounting firm to help us organize the payments from that we distributed to the cities and towns so that we'd be prepared to satisfy a federal audit when they decide to audit the funds that we received. We distributed the $3 million to the cities and towns based on the number of absentee ballots that they had to process and send out. Because of COVID, the legislature expanded the definition of disability to include concerns over COVID. And so the number of voters that voted by absentee ballot went from 10% up to just over 30%. And we created a formula with the accounting firm that would allow us to make flat payments based on the number of absentee ballots that the towns shipped out. And the federal funds were then distributed to the towns on that basis, because they were in fact the ones that really incurred actual costs related to the pandemic and the elections. This is a year where we don't have any elections, and so we're looking forward to hopefully a summer where we can catch up a little bit and rest and prepare for the next one. But Mr. Chair, that's the extent of my my input. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Senator Rosenwald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Mr. Scanlon.
Good
I
afternoon.
have a couple of questions. One, how much in HAVA funds does the department have on hand right now?
It is in the range of $10 to $11 million, give or take. Prior to the receipt of the funds that were specific to dealing with elections under the pandemic, the year before that, we had received another $3 million devoted to security efforts, cybersecurity efforts, primarily keeping our electronic systems secure. As you recall, before the pandemic, that was the big concern in elections. And when the pandemic occurred, it just kind of consumed everybody's attention. We have used some of that money for cybersecurity efforts, which are ongoing. And we will continue to expend those funds for that specific purpose as time goes on. But to answer your question, there's in the range of $10 million, give or take, in that fund.
Follow up.
Thank you. So as I recall from last year, the department had, I think, $18 million in HAVA funds. Does that mean you've spent 7 or 8 million?
No, I'm not sure how the $18 million was derived, but the history of that was that in 2000, the Help America Vote Act passed in 2002. And then in the couple of years after that, we received a total of $17 million. And those funds were to be used to meet the mandates of HAVA. The biggest one was the creation of a statewide centralized voter database, which was completed. The second one was making sure that there is accessible voting equipment for individuals with disabilities that want to vote privately and independently in the polling place. And we're actually on the probably the third generation of that equipment that we've provided for that purpose. And then the monies are to be used for poll worker training, voter education, and enforcement activities by the Attorney General's office. When that fund was created, the legislature said that we're going to spend what is necessary to meet the mandates, but then any principal balance that was left over was going to be kept in the election fund. And we were only authorized to spend so much of that each year. And at the time, we were getting a lot of interest on that money, with the idea being that the maintenance of the database, the ongoing education, establishing and replacing equipment for accessible voting is something that we could carry on into the future without having to go back to the general fund to cover those costs. And then we received the money for the cybersecurity just 2 or 3 years ago. That again goes into the election fund, but we were required to spend at least a significant portion of that money on cybersecurity activities. And then the third amount was the money for conducting election under COVID-19. So that's the history of the federal funds that we've received. And the current balance, again, is in that $10 million range, give or take. And I will provide the committee with the exact amount that's in that account currently.
One final follow-up, if I
We'll
may.
follow up.
Thank you. If I wanted to see how the federal funds, the CARES Act funds were distributed, would I be able to find that on Transparent New Hampshire? Or is that somewhere else?
Let me just ask Paula that question real quick. Would that be on Transparent?
Yes, any expenditures we made, like to the towns will show individually, but what was distributed by the accounting firm will show the accounting firm because that's who we paid.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Senator Rosenwald, the answer is yes, that should show up on Transparency New Hampshire. Show up as payments to the towns.
Okay.
And then a payment to the accounting firm, but we'll be happy to compile that, in a form that is easy for you to look at.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Further questions? Senator Gaida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dave, good to see you. Thanks for the good work and I'm sure it was a bustling period of time for the Secretary of State. I'd like to just go over to the process that's going on in Windham. There's some question regarding who's going to pay for the audits down there. I'm just wondering if the Secretary of State's office has the funds available, because some comments have been made to that respect, and I need to get that clarified if possible.
Yes, thank you, Senator Gaida. The legislature did pass Senate Bill 43, which requires an audit that has several components to it. There is going to be a cost that is associated with that. I think at the present time, it's a little premature to know exactly what those costs are going to be, but where the expenditures may be needed would be the audit team, which would involve experts that know how to look at the code and the equipment that's used in the ballot counting devices, the AccuVote machines. There may be a cost associated with live streaming the audit as it's taking place, which is a requirement in that legislation. So there may be some sources of state funds that we can use for that. In other words, if we have to hire an expert that looks at the software and the memory cards in the AccuVote machines, that may be a legitimate HAVA expense. But I'm not sure that there are enough funds to cover all of the costs that may be incurred because they may not be appropriate for HAVA expenditures.
Right. I probably anticipate a more in-depth discussion with you and the secretary here in the next day or two, because there's concerns expressed down out at the Windham town on that issue. And I don't know how it fits budgetarily, but certainly we need to have that discussion. Thanks, Dave.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Good to see you all.
Yeah. So 15 minutes? The committee is going to be in recess until 2:30. We need to see if we can move up the other appointments.
Testing, testing. Testing, testing. Testing, testing. Testing. Okay.
Okay, if the committee will please come back to order. We will continue with our presentations, and next is the Lottery Commission. And again, I will ask that those presenting, please introduce themselves.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Charlie McIntyre, the Director of the Hampshire Lottery, and with me is our Chief Financial Officer, Jim Duras. We're together, but we're not in the same room, not in the same town either. So good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Let me share my screen if I could. I'd forward over a slide presentation very briefly. This is a breakdown of our revenues. First slide is essentially a pie chart of where our gross revenues over the last 10 fiscal years have come from. Obviously, the vast majority of those are scratch tickets, and it still forms the bulk of our revenues. This is a graph, obviously, of our revenues by fiscal year over the last 15 years. Obviously, we've grown significantly over the last 15 years, surely the last 10, which we're quite proud of. And this is our instant ticket sales over the last 15 years, obviously grown as well. And this year is no exception. We are well in excess of $300 million in scratch ticket sales this year. This slide is what Powerball and Mega Millions, and then it's meant to show, as you can see, how the revenues related to jackpot games are very sporadic and unstable, as it were. So in good years, we do well, in bad years, we don't. And that's just based on how the ping pong balls bounce. Big jackpots equal big sales, low jackpots equal low sales. And since this is the ending of the best number, this is our distributions through education over the last 15 years and our expectations for this year as well as the out 2 years. Currently, our projection is for $122 million net profitability this year, $125 million FY22 and $127.5 in FY23. It is more than likely that we will be revising revenue estimates upward in the next 2 weeks as well. So that's also good news. So with that, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, happy to answer any questions you have or go over our budget sort of item by item if you wish.
Okay, first of all, I'd like to point out to the committee that his budget is on page 1517 of the compare document, and take any questions. Senator Morse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Charlie, thank you. Can you tell me what you have in debt right now on buildings?
Jim, I know you have the number. What it's about?
It's about $1.75 million.
1.75 or 2.75?
1.75, Senator Morse, Mr. President.
And what are you carrying for debt service per year on that?
It's online. I think it's 205. It's on line 43.
Yeah, that includes principal and interest. Interest is running about 100,000 per year. We expect the overall interest over the remaining of the term to be just under $1 million.
Senator Gaida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Charlie, good to see you. Does your estimates for future revenues include historic horse racing?
They do not, sir.
So that'd be an extra 12 million then.
Correct. And honestly, my CFO will always kick me under the table if he could, but we expect to raise guidance the next couple of weeks significantly as well for this fiscal year, which we hope may affect outflow years as well, potentially. And without including historic horse racing, we have been under tremendous growth over the last year and a half. And I, in part owed to the folks I get to work with every day who, our job didn't get easier the last year, and we're still increasing our gross profitability by almost 30%.
So follow up,
Follow up.
Thank you. Any idea of how much of our revenues from gaming come from out-of-state people playing in state? Is there any way, probably no way to know that?
There is actually, what you would take is you would take the number of claims that are filed in our office, and then you would look and see who was out of state that claimed it. And that would give you the sample size will be large enough. So every ticket over $600 has to get claimed in our offices. And so if you took the entire universe of those claims, you would have thousands of claims, and that's a large enough number to be statistically valid as against all sales. So I would guess somewhere in the neighborhood of 15%, but I'd have to check, sir. And that's not a hard exercise for us to do.
Thank you.
Sports betting is probably, we know more. Sports betting, about 13% of our mobile is out of state, and probably half of our physical retail locations are from out of state.
Thank you.
Excuse me. Oh, excuse me. I need to revise something. I just brought up my balance sheet and the senator was correct. It is 2.7, not 1.7. I apologize for that. On the mortgage loan payable on the building.
I knew
Hmm. Further questions? Senator D'Alessandro.
Thank you. Charlie, how many buildings did you buy?
We just bought the one headquarters on Integra Drive.
And what, you have an alternate site also. Do you lease that?
Correct. Yeah, we have one on Regional Drive, which is in a building with a bunch of other tenants, just due to expansion. We rent that space.
One further question. Charlie, I noticed that the facilities south of us have picked up, and they did $84 million worth of business, a substantial increase over their expectations. Do you find that that's going to affect us in any way?
Certainly haven't seen it yet. It remains to be seen, but it's always a possibility. And I do know that thankfully our good friends in Mass don't seem to be interested in sports betting for this fiscal year. So that's another year of their money.
Thank you.
Senator Daniels, if I could raise the issue on the expenses related to historic horse racing. Senator Guy just reminded me are attached to HB 626. I don't know if they should also be included in HB 1 because the historic horse race isn't in HB 2.
It's 626 we're hearing. We passed 112 was the Senate version. That's being held by the House, and so we'll be deliberating 626 on Monday.
Okay, so we'll make sure it's included in our budget as well, the expenses related to the regulation of that going forward, that's all.
Right.
Okay. Seeing any further questions? Don't see any. That all, Charlie?
Nope, certainly, we're just having a great year, sir, and I'm proud of it.
Okay, super. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Thank you. You as well.
Thanks, Charlie.
And next is the Board of Tax and Land Appeals.
Good afternoon. I'm just looking for where I can find the video, sorry.
There you go.
Good afternoon, Senator Daniels and members of the Finance Committee. My name is Michelle LeBrun. I'm the chair of the Board of Tax and Land Appeals. With me is our clerk, Ann Stelmack, who's available should there be questions that she's better suited to address. The board's budget request for fiscal years 2022 and 2023 is primarily a maintenance budget We are not seeking any new initiatives or any new employees. The increases in expenses are those over which we don't have any control. Our percentage increase from fiscal year 20 actual to 21 adjusted is 2%. That increase has an increase of 11% over benefits and a slight increase in rent, or the significant increase in rent. And that's where pretty much where the 2% lies. Fiscal years 22 and 23 are 4% from fiscal 2021 and 3% from 2022. The major expenses are, as I said, rent and benefits. There are additional salaries that I think the governor put in for classes 10 and 11 for fiscal 23. And those are the only costs really that the board is looking at. The pandemic has resulted in us spending less money in fiscal 2020 also. So the actuals in 2020 are lower than they normally would be or would have been. And with that, I think that's all I have to say. We ask that you approve this budget as approved by the House. And with that, I'll answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Michelle. Any questions from the committee? Very straightforward. For committee members, that's on page 194 of the compare budget. And seeing no questions, thank you very much. That was
Very quick.
sweet to the point, right. Well, thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you. Have a great weekend.
Senator Guida is not going to let you off the hook. Senator Guida.
Just a sort of a question about the current status of real estate has gone crazy as far as sales. Are you seeing any increase in challenges, to BTLA regarding property assessments?
We're expecting that will happen for 2020. Those appeals would start coming in shortly. The tax bills go out in July and then in December. So it would be up until March 1st that a taxpayer would have time to file an appeal or an abatement request and then an appeal to this board by September 1st. So we're anticipating that we will be seeing quite a few more appeals in the next year as a result of the pandemic.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good weekend, everyone.
Which begs the question, is there such a thing as a bad weekend?
Good question.
Only if you have to shovel snow, Senator Guida.
Yeah, well, it's coming down.
All right, thank you, folks. Have a great
Thank you.
weekend. And momentarily, we will bring L-Chip in. That will be on page 192. We are a little bit ahead of schedule, so the committee will be in recess until we get the last presenter on board so we can bring them in. Okay, committee will please come back to order. And we'll recognize Digit Taylor for LCHIP. Good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Senator. It's a pleasure, as always, to have a chance to meet with you all. I am Digit Taylor, the Executive Director of LCHIP. It continues to be my pleasure and honor to serve in this position. We like to say a couple of things about LCHIP. One is that we save what people love about New Hampshire. The other is that we are a program that makes state government look good to the residents of the state. And I think that's something that we can all feel happy about. I have provided for you a colored handout that shows some of the basic information about LCHIP, as well as pictures of projects in, I think, the districts of each member of your committee. We are, as a reminder, we're a matching grants program that was created by the legislature with overwhelming support in 2000. Our legislated purpose is to conserve and preserve the state's most important natural, cultural, and historic resources through matching grants and public-private partnerships in order to protect and ensure the perpetual contribution of these resources to the state's economy, environment, and overall quality of life. Better. We use no general funds, and the money that we give out for grants comes from a $25 fee on recording documents at registries of deeds all over the state. We are a state authority, not a state agency or department, and many of our administrative costs are covered by a $200,000 a year contribution from the Moose Plate program. As you can see on the handout, we do a remarkably good job of meeting our legislated purpose. We have protected almost 300,000 acres. We've given out 530 grants. We have helped with projects in 179 of the state's 234 communities. And we have partnered in public-private partnerships with dozens of municipalities and nonprofits to complete these projects. Over 20 years, $54 million in state money has led to a total project investment of over $300 million, which far exceeds the match that is required. Our projects are spread very well across the whole state. In the counties that you all represent, Grafton County has received 53 grants and $5.4 million. Hillsborough County, 54 grants and $8 million, and Rockingham County, a whopping 94 grants and $9.7 million. We are a popular and needed program. Just last year, we had 66 applicants seeking $8.9 million. We ended up having $4.1 million available to distribute to, and that went to 32 different projects. Besides helping the board of directors select the applicants to receive grant money, LCHIP staff is also responsible for making sure that the projects that received grants in previous years are completed to the highest professional standards to ensure that the state money is well invested. And we are also responsible for ensuring that grant recipients who all have legal obligations to the state through LCHIP are taking proper care of the projects that they've received funding for. We have about 300 of those kinds of projects of that sort right now. So we're taking care of a lot of projects. There are lots of pretty pictures and a great deal more information on the LCHIP website. And beyond that, I am happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Senator Gaida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I have to disclose in all full disclosure that I serve on the board with great pleasure. Digit does an outstanding job, and her staff, for the people in the historic buildings in our state. We've had just an avalanche of out-of-state people moving in and buying up properties, and I'm wondering, Digit, if the $5 million that you're reflecting with the house's estimate is going to be exceeded. Do you have any sense? Are you monitoring that at all?
It's certainly coming in very strongly so far this year. The 5 million that shows in both the governor's budget and the House budget is actually an increase over the intended amount for the previous biennium. So that already includes something more than what we would expect based on last year's money coming in. And we do have the authority, if we receive more money than what is budgeted, to go through the fiscal process and get approval to spend the additional money, which is the procedure that we have followed for the several years before this, when the budgeted amount was $3.5 million and the actual was somewhere approaching $4 million.
Well, thank you for the excellent work you do. Thank you for answering my question.
Thank you. Further questions?
No,
Senator D'Alessandro?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think mine centered around what the Senator Gaida said. Given the boom in real estate and the real estate transfer tax, is that 5 million an underestimate in terms of what you'll be receiving? Because you're hidden, I mean, you're tied right into the real estate transfer tax. You get that money on a monthly basis. I look at it and it seems to have been, we've seen significant growth there is what I'm saying. That particular tax item is performing way above expectations. And if you budgeted on expectations, the activity has far exceeded expectations.
Is there a question in there, Senator D'Alessandro?
Did you underestimate the revenue?
Possibly. But while I have your attention, I wanted to particularly to point out the project in Manchester that I've highlighted on the handout. It's the Manchester Cedar Swamp, which LCHIP helped the Nature Conservancy acquire a number of years ago. But I'm very excited because right now the Nature Conservancy has been in the middle of a great deal of outreach to people in the central city of Manchester to find out what would make outdoor activities and access to that particular property more appealing to them. And the Nature Conservancy expects to start construction on an accessible trail at the Cedar Swamp this fall and is in negotiations to have a public bus stop increase their parking there so a bus could get in to drop people off. So people from the city could get out and enjoy this fabulous property that's on the outskirts of the city.
Well, thank you very much for that. I think it's important. The center of the city is becoming very crowded.
Let's let them get out and get some fresh air and enjoy the trail.
We got to let them get some fresh air, for sure.
There are further questions? Approximately how many projects come in on an average per year? Because it looks like right now you might have some 34 projects that are hanging around that didn't get funded in 2020.
Yes, the number, so you're asking how many applications do we get in an average year, Senator?
Yes.
50 to 60, although the number has been increasing in recent years.
And the 32 that you were able to fulfill in 2020, is that an average?
Yes, I would say an average year is probably 25 to 30 projects receiving funding.
Okay.
Depends a lot on the size of the project, of course. We had one rather big one last year.
Thank you. Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for your presentation.
Oh, thank you for doing it earlier in the day. I hope that this means you all get to have your day end sooner as well.
You were the only thing standing between us and the roadway.
In that case, you've been extremely courteous and I appreciate your time and attention.
Thank you. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, you too. Bye-bye.
With that, we will be meeting again on Monday at 1 o'clock here in the chambers. And that I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Senator Hennessy, seconded by Senator Gaida. And call roll. Senator Rosenwald.
Yes.
Senator Hennessy.
Yes.
Senator D'Alessandro.
Yes.
Senator Morse. Senator Gaida.
Regretfully, yes.
You may stay on. The chair votes yes, and we will be adjourned. Thank you, folks. We'll see you Monday.